Awesome. Thanks, Jake. And I realized probably most of you already know this, but I forgot to say that this is a series co-hosted by Blue Hill Heritage Trust, where I work, and Island Heritage Trust, where Jake works, and then fabulous community members, which is Maria here today. So we are so excited to have Maria here with us. She is the Midcoast Regional Stewardship Manager for the Maine Island Trail Association and works with volunteers and partners to steward islands from Pemaquid Point to Naskeag Point. So Maria, thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And as we were just saying, we've partnered with IHT and Blue Hill Heritage Trust for a while on, kind of the stewardship and the trail side of things. So it's fun to find kind of new ways to collaborate, especially in this, kind of time where we're able to do so many of these virtual presentations. It's great. And I will note that this is kind of my first time giving a webinar, so bear with me. It's a little different not being able to kind of see who's out there. And sometimes I have a hard time kind of monitoring the chat as it's coming in. So thanks to you two for helping. If there's anything that I miss kind of during the presentation, feel free to just kind of chime in and do that. So let's see, can you see? Worked this morning first thing. Can you see my screen now? But I'm trying to get to.
Yes, we can see your screen. Not sure.
I think if you go to slideshow, there might be like presentation mode.
Well, it's hiding the. Let's see. It's
up next to review, to the left of review. That might.
Up in the orange.
It's hiding the present. There we go. View slideshow. I'm sorry for this.
That's okay.
No
so
worries.
If you're on the view tab, if you go.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. It was the Zoom panel was kind of hiding some of my controls there. All right. I think I've got this figured out now. Oops. So. I'm going to give kind of just an overview of the Maine Island Trail, kind of what it is, how it came to be, kind of the origins of the trail, and talk a little bit about the Maine Island Trail Association, known as MITA, who I work for. And I've been with MITA since 2012 in a stewardship capacity. And I'll talk about, since that's kind of my personal role with the organization, I'll talk about our stewardship programs and ways to get involved through stewardship, and then share some of the kind of upcoming resources that MITA is putting together for new boaters as well. So often when I tell people that I work for MITA, a response I get is, or for the Maine Island Trail, they'll say, oh, trails on islands, which yes, some of the islands do have trails, but the bigger concept is that the islands are the trail. So some people kind of liken it to the Appalachian Trail for boaters. So it's basically a series of islands, and the way one of our volunteers put it was, we provide the dots, you connect them. So it's just a network of islands that are open for use, and MITA is the organization that helps steward those islands and manage the trail. And we're a membership-based organization. So the trail's really for small boaters of any kind. It's not just for paddlers, is kind of a common misconception, but any small boat that can land on the islands. Of our membership, about half self-identify as paddlers, and then the other half is pretty evenly split between power boaters and sailors. And similar to the Appalachian Trail, there's a lot of different ways that you can use the Maine Island Trail. Some people will, do the whole thing end to end, either through paddle it in one go or cruise the entire coast. Other people will go out for just shorter, camping trips or just a day trip or a couple hours. So there's really just a range of ways that you can enjoy the trail. And just like the coast has so many, is diverse, there's, everything from protected tidal waters and bays to kind of more exposed. There's really just an incredible diversity of experiences you can have on the trail. So stepping back, kind of thinking about how the trail came to be, as I think everybody knows, we just have an incredible coastline here in Maine, and we have about 5,000 miles of coastline when you count all the tidal rivers and around all the islands. So it's just, really kind of endless opportunities for exploration. And in thinking about how many islands, some of you may have kind of heard some of these statistics. The answer kind of varies. How many islands are there in Maine? It depends on, do you count that Rocky Ledge as an island? Do you count islands at high tide or low tide? but most counts put it is at around 5,000 islands on the coast of Maine. And there's a long history from indigenous habitation to European settlement, and that could be its own series of presentations. But kind of for these purposes, I'll kind of skip forward to the mid 1900s when most of the islands that had been inhabited were pretty well vacated. A lot of islands were just considered worthless. They didn't have much value to them. And in the late 70s, the state did what's called the Coastal Island Registry, where they kind of indexed all the islands along the entire coast, and every island, every ledge, and basically any island where someone couldn't prove ownership or produce a deed, the state ownership reverted to the state. So all of a sudden, the state came into ownership of hundreds of islands without kind of really knowing what they had. And so following on that, actually it was 1,300 islands that the state suddenly owned after this process. So in the mid 80s, the Department of Conservation contracted with Dave Getchell Sr. He worked for the Island Institute at the time, and hired him to survey the islands that they owned. And he was kind of looking specifically at some of the recreation potential of some of the islands. So he had this kind of checklist that he would use to inventory the islands, and he spent a summer going along the entire coast in an 18-foot lunge, pictured here. And that's one of the interesting things when we people think that it's a trail for kayakers, but really it was kind of the idea came from someone who was a power boater and going out in his aluminum boat. And so kind of what he found over the course of the summer going out to all these islands, a lot of, small, rocky, spruce covered islands, a number of which were being used, parties, weddings, all sorts of things. And in a number of cases found that not just being used, some of the islands were, not being well cared for. There was trash in the fire pits, toilet paper everywhere, sometimes toilets on the islands, a lot of vandalism of the trees, whether it was for bark or limbing for fires. You can see in the photo on the right there, what we refer to as the human browse line. So they'll be kind of nipped down about as high as you can reach. So you saw a lot of kind of impacts like that. And so kind of coming out of this, this survey, he wrote an article in a column that he wrote, and it was in Small Boat Journal. And he basically proposed this idea of a water trail, which was completely new at the time. He kind of said this could be, a waterway for small boaters. And at the same time that he proposed the trail, he recognized there need to be some sort of association or organization to help manage it. So in kind of two parts, he proposed this idea of a water trail and a group to take care of it. And he kind of said, hey, write me a letter, tell me what you think. And that's really what started all of this. They got together. It was a group of 12 that kind of had the first meetings to talk about this idea and kind of debated back and forth, how they would manage it, what it would look like. And one of the things that they really built in from the beginning was this idea of stewardship, that the people who are out there are going to be taking care of the islands. They're going to be kind of tasked or charged with that. So they worked with the state and LL Bean to get kind of the initial funding for the organization, and kind of created the Maine Island Trail Association. It started under the umbrella of the Island Institute for the first 5 years, and then split off to become its own nonprofit, kind of with, as there were different missions. So it started with a board of directors and a staff of 2. So that's the Maine Island Trail when it was founded in 1988. There was 2 staff. There were 30 sites going from Portland to Jonesport. They were all pretty much all state-owned islands, most allowed camping. And they put information out to members of the organization in a spiral-bound, or a 3-ring binder notebook. The idea would be that you could kind of add to it or take from it over time, that those pages would be kind of interchangeable. And so then kind of fast forward just over 30 years later till today, we have 246 sites on the trail from the initial 30. And a mix, we have 177 islands, 69 mainland sites. And of the total sites, about half allow camping. And the other half are just day use. And we still put out a paper guidebook every year. I don't remember when, but we moved away from the 3-ring binder as membership grew and islands grew. So it comes out in a spiral bound book every year. And the trail goes from Kittery to Cobscook Bay. So we've really expanded on both ends, and we continue to grow the trail, add in sites to fill gaps, and that sort of thing. And in addition to the paper guidebook, we also in 2014 launched a mobile app. It's by the app developer Chimani, who are actually based in Maine, down in Yarmouth. So they do a series of national park apps, and they were able to kind of tailor that. So it's basically the guidebook information in app form, and it's free to download for anyone. And you can get all the public sites and launch ramp information. There's a lot of kind of extra stuff that doesn't fit in the paper guidebook in the app, and then members get access to the full content. And then as far as kind of the organization goes, that was the trail growing from 30 to 246 sites, and we now are at 10 full-time staff, and we have 2 seasonal caretakers in Casco Bay and 8,500 members at the end of last year. So it's grown quite considerably. This is, you can tell, a relatively recent photo. This is from last fall. This is the entire staff on a cleanup at an island in Casco Bay. And we have the office originally was in Rockland, and that moved around a little bit. We have a Portland-based office, although these days most people are working from home. And just wanted to share the mission statement of the Maine Island Trail, because this is really something that kind of has been consistent since the beginning, this idea that the trail will be used for, or it'll be cared for by the people who use it. It was actually just last year we updated our mission statement after a strategic planning process. It hadn't changed since the founding of the organization. The mission statement had read to establish a model. And so we kind of thought it was time that the model had been established, and tweaked the wording slightly, but the real essence is that volunteer stewardship of the trail. And another aspect that's kind of been true since the founding of the trail was this idea of partnership. And MITA does not own any islands. We don't hold any easements. Everything is just a handshake agreement with island owners. So, island owners kind of, just agree to have their islands on the trail, and it's just on an annual basis that we kind of renew that agreement. And so this is a list of kind of all the different partners that we have. There's tons of partners, and it's a split about between just under a third are privately owned, private individuals. Increasingly, we have a lot of nonprofit owned islands, especially land trusts that are part of the trail. And then the state owned still makes up a big kind of percentage of the total trail sites. And then there's other public, municipalities, federal agencies as well. And like I was saying, all of the, kind of island owners agree to have their island on the trail with the understanding that it'll be better cared for if people have the information, they have the guidelines that go out in the guidebook, they understand kind of what they can and can't do on the islands. So part of my job is kind of making good on that promise and making sure that we're taking good care of the islands. So I'll share some of our stewardship programs, the ways that we do that. And probably our most visible stewardship program are our island cleanups that we do, especially our big scale cleanups every spring and fall. And on a typical cleanup day, we'll have about 24 volunteers go out in 4 or 5 boats, head out, clean all the islands you can in a given region, and come back with boats piled high. And the cleanups have been part of MITA's stewardship work since the beginning. So in the early days, members would kind of go out and organize themselves, go out in their boats and clean the islands. And then soon thereafter, as the organization started acquiring boats, organized cleanups to be able to kind of engage more people and get more people out and going along. So, 30 years later, we're still doing the cleanups. There's still trash out there. And, it's one of the most fun parts of the job, really, to see something go from looking like this to looking like that. And it's just kind of the real tangible feeling. And then, of course, in kind of normal times, just the social aspect of it, too, going out and you have a couple people in your boat and you really just get to know people in a way that's fun and enjoy doing the work. They're some of our most popular events, and people get really excited to go out and pick up trash, but it's also a way for people who don't have boats to get out on the islands to these beautiful places and help take care of them. And as far as kind of the work that we do on the cleanups, a lot of it is the same old stuff that we're picking up, which can be, a little disheartening. But just kind of typical shoreline debris. When it comes to fishing gear, many of you probably know that lobster fishing gear is protected by Maine laws. So for decades, MITA had to leave any buoys behind. We weren't allowed to take them off of the islands. And then when I started in 2012, we started a buoy return program. So we piloted it actually in Stonington, was kind of the first test region for this. So we work with Maine Marine Patrol to get special permission to remove good buoys off the islands and try to return them for lobstermen to be able to claim and reuse. And Stonington's still been the kind of the best success that we've had with this program, and we'll return hundreds of buoys every year. So that's been a really nice program to see that succeed. And then traps are the other big piece. Those kind of are their own beast of a cleanup just because of how much volume they take up. They're tricky to work with because it's mangled, rusty metal. But we will periodically do kind of trap dedicated cleanups where we again we're working with Marine Patrol and harbor masters to get the permission to remove them. And then as often as we can, we're trying to recycle the metal, so that will involve trying to crush the traps down, get them to fit. So they're kind of extra work for these cleanups, but they are incredibly rewarding, just like the others. We weren't sure if all the traps would fit in the dumpster, so we were pretty excited when we fit them all in. Clean up in Naskeag Bay a few years ago. So in addition to the cleanups, we organize a lot of other work days too. And so, anything from invasive plant management to erosion control in some places. There's a tent platform on one of the islands there. The top right, that's actually the cabin demolition on Carlton Island that we did, I guess 5 or 6 years ago now, when Blue Hill Heritage Trust took on ownership of that island. And then just, trail maintenance, keeping campsites clear, clearing blowdowns from campsites and trails, that sort of thing. So we'll organize smaller work parties for those projects. And then another kind of key part of our stewardship efforts is the monitoring. So in the early days, there was a lot of concern that the islands would be overused or overrun, especially in the 90s. There was such a boom of sea kayaking, kind of similar to the interest we're seeing now in outdoor recreation. And so this is kind of the less visible, but really one of the most important parts of our stewardship work is keeping an eye on the islands. And we kind of operate on the broken window theory that, if a place looks well cared for, the people who visit it are more likely to help take care of it. So making sure places are, picked up and looking clean, and that people there know what the guidelines are. And so we have a couple different volunteer programs that do this. We have our island adopters and our monitor skippers. So island adopters are folks who go out in their own boats on their own time to check on the islands, pick up whatever trash they can, talk to visitors that they meet, and that sort of thing. And island adopters will adopt a specific island or sometimes islands and then kind of visit it throughout the season. And there's a lot of kind of variability there of how often they're able to go out, and there's no real set minimum. So anyone who kind of wants to be part of that program, as long as you can get out, at least a couple times over the course of the season, that's a great way. If you've got your own boat, that's a great way to volunteer. And then we have our monitor skippers, and they kind of perform the same duties of island monitoring, but they're going out on a set schedule in MITA boats. So we schedule them throughout the season, and they'll go on a single day. They'll visit anywhere from 6 to 12 islands, depending on where they are. It's what we call a monitor run. So they'll spend a day, buzzing around to all the islands, checking on them. And they're really kind of our most dedicated core of volunteers. And because it's on a set schedule, we know that we have this kind of baseline of eyes on the islands. And we have about 25 on average skippers that are part of the program. Many have been with the program for 10 or more years. Some have been with it for over 20 or 25 years since the beginning of the skipper program. Collectively, there's over 500 years of service with the skippers. So it's really an amazing crew of volunteers to work with. Yeah, they also are the ones who are driving for the cleanups and the work days. They're driving our boats. We have a fleet of 6 of those 18-foot luns that are stationed strategically along the coast for the skippers to be able to take and use. And I'd say with all of the programs, whether it's an island adopter or a monitor skipper, one of the key pieces is the reporting, letting us know how the island looks. So we have an online report form that they write back, and even if the island looks fine, if there's nothing wrong, we like to hear about the visit, because then that way at the end of the season, we can tell the island owners, hey, we had volunteers check on your island this many times and everything looked good, or this is what we found and this is what we did about it. So that's a key piece to making sure we maintain strong relationships with all of our partners and island owners. And then the other thing that goes into those reports are the logbook comments. So on many of the islands, we have signs that have the information guidelines on, kind of the do's and don'ts on the island, and it's whatever the island owner's wishes are. And then we'll hang a logbook in a Tupperware container. And the logbook provides kind of usage data and visitor information, but the comments are always the most fun part of it to read through. There's just really wonderful comments from island visitors. So those get sent to all the island owners at the end of the season as well. And of course, I've talked a lot about, kind of our group volunteering and a lot of things that, like many organizations last year, we kind of pressed pause on the big group work days. And we even, with the logbooks, we switched to a digital logbook. It was an online form last year. And we're planning to re-implement the physical logbooks this year. We found that there's something about being on an island. People really want the physical logbook, the tangible thing. There is just signing in on your phone doesn't have the same effect, and not being able to flip back through, which we completely understand. So we're not going to be replacing those with digital. We'll keep the physical logbooks. But last year, what we did in the absence of kind of these big volunteer days, we launched what we call the call to oars. And so the idea was people who are out on the islands, asking them to pitch in with stewardship, just the regular recreational visitor, and then write back and let us know. So this screenshot here is a story map that we put together to kind of highlight all these stewardship reports and photos that were sent in as part of this initiative. And it started as kind of a COVID response, realizing we weren't going to have all these big work days. But then we realized, very quickly that it actually kind of harkened back to the founding principles, that the people who are out there visiting the islands are pitching in with their stewardship. So this is something that we're planning to kind of really make more formalized in our volunteer programs, so that it's easy for anyone who's out there visiting the island, pitch in with stewardship, pick up what you can, send us a picture, let us know how things looked. And that's been a really great way to kind of engage some new folks with island stewardship and reach people. And it's been a really fun kind of bringing us back to our roots, really. Let's see. So yeah, really, as you can see, pretty much all of our work comes down to volunteers. We have a staff of 10. There are 3 of us who are stewardship managers covering the entire coast. So it's really all driven by the volunteers. And that's kind of the most rewarding part of my work, is getting to work with all the volunteers as well. And just to kind of share, so our stewardship programs are kind of a great way to get involved and, learn more about the organization, getting out. And lastly, just wanted to share some other resources that I mentioned. So in May this year, our communications and outreach staff are going to be putting together a series of content for, especially for new boaters. So there'll be webinars and blog posts and social media, and the details aren't kind of ironed out enough yet to go to be able to share, but kind of keep your eyes posted if you're interested in any of that. And then we also have a series of member benefits as well. So that includes, so people who don't have access to their own boats, there's kayak rentals and tours and kind of powerboat rentals and charters and lessons. There's over 40 businesses that kind of offer those benefits that are online. And then another great resource for those in the kind of Blue Hill and Deer Isle regions is Off Center Harbor. For those who aren't familiar with it, they have an online library with, over 500 videos primarily and articles for small boat building and maintenance and repair and boat handling. So that's a really great resource for boaters as well. So I've kind of flown through the slides and yeah, maybe that's good to get some more time if people have questions about anything I covered or just anything related to the trail or to MITA. I'm happy to.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was great. We do have some questions rolling in. We have a couple participants who have raised their hands as well. But to start with the first questions that came in, people are wondering what is the name of the app and where they might find it.
Yes, the Maine Island Trail. I think if you just, in whatever app store you use, it's the Maine Island Trail app.
Cool. Jake, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. And let's see, yeah, people are really excited about the app.
Great.
And then there was a question about Long Island and Blue Hill Harbor. Is that part of the MITA? I think you said
It is not part of the trail.
it's not part of the trail. Okay. And then let's see.
So I don't know. Yeah, and I don't know that much about that one. I'm happy to answer any island questions that I can, but.
Well, I have a quick question. Have you done the entire length of the trail ever in one go, like destination wise?
I have not traversed the whole thing in one go. Prior to working with MITA, I was a sea kayak guide. So I used to spend, the other question I get commonly, I work for MITA, oh, you must kayak a lot. When in truth, I kayak very little now. I'm out in our skiffs most of the time. When I first started on staff with MITA, there was one stewardship position. So I covered the entire coast. So I haven't done the coast end to end, but through my time with MITA, I've been able to explore most of the coastline, which is, really been wonderful.
That is wonderful.
But there are a few, we might have last year kind of did a similar, series of webinars and that sort of thing. So I know on our website, we have recordings of some, there was someone who did kind of a speed trip. There's a sea kayak guide last summer who did a speed trip of the entire coast. So he did a presentation on that. And then our executive director did a trail trip a couple of years ago in his whaler and made a video about it. So I know his video lives somewhere. I can find those links afterwards if you want to send them around.
That would be awesome. And I just want to plug, I saw in the chat box as you were talking that there was some inquiry about how to volunteer. So Lander, maybe we can include the link to MITA's website where they can sign up for volunteering and get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go, I should have put the link in here, MITA.org/volunteer. There's a form that you can fill out there, and that kind of gets you on our list.
Cool.
And thanks for that question.
And people can also just reach out to me directly so I work kind of in Muscongas Bay, Penobscot Bay through the Deer Isle region. So feel free to reach out to me directly, or if you're interested in volunteering elsewhere, I can put you in touch with my colleagues who cover other areas.
Awesome. So Maria, is it okay if I put your work email in our follow-up email to all registrants?
Of course, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I will do that. Okay, so let's see. We have a hand raised. Looks like Pete March has a question. Pete, I'm going to allow you to talk and you just have to unmute yourself. So if you have a question and you meant to raise your hand, sometimes I know it's an accident, but just you can unmute yourself and then we should be able to hear you.
Okay, I think I did it now. Can you hear me? Good. I'd like to know if we can get together with someone in the Deer Isle area for, let me see, what is it called? The monitor skippers. I do not have a boat, but I would love to go out with one of the monitor skippers on one of their journeys. Is that possible?
Yeah, if you reach out to me. And it's been a little bit different, this past year or two, just with the pandemic and kind of different volunteers' comfort level with having non-family members. Last year, we were a little more strict with trying to limit it to family members in the boats. This year, we're not doing that. So yeah, if you reach out to me, I can connect you with some of our skippers who I know would be looking for crew.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Pete. So Maria, we have a question in the chat box. You might be able to see it. For boaters who are trailering from parts unknown, how available and accommodating are places where you can leave your car in a trailer for a number of days?
I'm glad someone asked that question because that is actually a really big focus area for MITA right now, is looking at access and parking, overnight parking especially. I think it depends on where you're going, what part of the coast you're in. So in our guidebook and app, we do have launch ramp information. And so by region, you can, basically both resources are organized by region. And then for each region, you can see where the launch ramp facilities are, and each one it specifies if there's overnight parking allowed. If so, you know, do you have to call for permission, kind of what the details are. But what we're finding is that kind of coast-wide, there are some real gaps in just accessibility. So there's plenty of places to go out on the water, but sometimes finding places to park can be a challenge. So that's something that we are working on. Stonington especially, that area is one that we're kind of focused on, looking for other options. So I'd say it depends on where you're looking to go, but the guidebook and the app have as much information as we can put out there, and that's something we're really focused on.
Thank you. And we had a question about the monitor skippers and if they're required to have Coast Guard certification.
Yeah, so our skipper program, I can talk a little bit more about that. And we have on our volunteering website, we have kind of a brochure that is some of the frequently asked questions about the skipper program. So they're not required to have Coast Guard certifications, but they do. So all skippers go through an apprentice process in the program. And so anyone coming in as an apprentice skipper, you know, we're kind of expecting them to have a certain level of boating skills already. And then what they're learning in the apprentice process is more about the nuances of what it's like to be a MITA skipper, you know, the boats themselves and kind of the role of what we're doing out there. So they go through a training process, which is basically going out with a staff person and then accompanying skippers on their runs. And after this training process, they get signed off to be able to drive the boats. So that's why I think we have such a high level of dedication within that program, because it takes a bit to kind of become a monitor skipper and go through that. I'd say the biggest kind of learning curve for some folks is a lot of people with their own power boats, they'll anchor and row in. And with our aluminum boats, we're running them right up on shore, and we're going in, you know, very shallow, rocky areas. So handling the boat in those shallow, rocky places and navigating those landings is kind of the trickiest bit for a lot of people to get used to. So short answer, no, they're not required, but there is kind of an apprentice and training process for that program.
Maria, I think there might have been a question a little back further. I'm not sure if it was answered from Jen. What is the website that has tips in Blue Hill and Deer Isle again, I think is the question?
Off Center Harbor. And I think they're just offcenterharbor.com. Perhaps I can look that up and put that in there. And they're really focused on kind of the traditional small craft, so small wooden boats, and whether it's sail or rowing or paddling.
So Mariah, I know a little bit of I know a little bit of the Buoy program in Stonington, obviously, which is huge. It's it saves waste, it gives back to the local fishermen. It's wonderful. The traps is a little bit trickier. Is there like any sort of redemption or recycling process for that, or is it unfortunately just all sort of junked in the end?
It depends. So there are some kind of larger recycling places. So in Portland, there's a place we can bring them. So there are a couple centers where we can work to bring them, but it's I feel like scrap metal, there's kind of more options for recycling there. One of the tricks that we find is depending on where we're recycling it, they want us to cut the bricks out. And so that can be easier said than done. Once the trap is all crushed after being, rolling around on the bottom of the seafloor, it's not always so easy to cut out the weights from them. So that's an extra step that goes in there. I'd say the logistics of the trap cleanups, it's more that we have to kind of notify Marine Patrol they have to, check them, and they're verifying with each one that yes, it's actually junk. If there's any trap that is at all questionable that it might be a serviceable trap, Marine Patrol's then contacting the fishermen. So there's kind of a back and forth that happens there.
And it's a fine line because some of the fishermen really run those traps to their last.
Exactly. And there's always a difference of like, no, that's junk, or of course I can reuse these parts of it. So there's so much variability. But what we found has worked well is just trying to build relationships with the local Marine Patrol officers, where sometimes if there's just a handful of traps on an island, I can send them a picture and kind of ask them, is this good? Can I take it off? But that's both the traps and the buoys. That's something that we can do on kind of staff led or organized cleanups, but that the permission that we're getting from Marine Patrol doesn't extend to just volunteers going out on their own to do that.
That makes sense.
And the photos that I shared, those happened to be from Muscongas Bay, and then we've done some cleanups on Pemaquid Point with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And those are places where a lot of traps accumulate in one place. So those are just the big dedicated several hundred traps at a go, which are big projects, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, the magnitude of that dumpster was impressive. What was the shore frontage that was involved?
It was,
cleanup?
Yeah, not as much as you would think. So we filled 2 40-yard dumpsters of crushed traps on that cleanup, and it was maybe a 1-acre island that it all came off of. It's an island that's just kind of right at the tip of the bay, and the way currents work, you find some places that just accumulate a lot more than others.
Impressive.
And we'll probably be doing another one of those cleanups this year or the next. So it's, every 2 or 3 years, I'd say there's enough that washes up to warrant. And it's easier if you do it, when there's 50 to 100 traps rather than 300 traps. So.
Thanks, Maria. There's another question from Brian. For a first-time boater on the Maine coast, what is a good starting point for an out-of-town small sailboater?
Oh, that's a good question. And I'm trying to think. I know, so because I'm personally, of all the boating that I've done, sailing is kind of my least experience with that. And so I would say, I know Sail Maine is an organization out of Portland that would really be a good resource for sailing. And as far as the events that we'll be holding in May, they're not all solidified yet, but I know we'll have one that's focused on sailing. Sorry, I can't answer that one better. And I see the events question. If that's on the app that link is broken, but if you go to MITA.org/events, that'll have a list of upcoming events, and it'll be added to continually.
Somebody in the chat box is suggesting that Rockland Harbor has a good launch facility and good parking. Thank you, Keith. So Maria, I think at one point you showed on your slide a link to your blog or to MITA's blog. What types of things do you share on the blog? Are there stories of people's travels or trips, or what type of thing do you share?
Yeah, there's a variety. So sometimes it's content that we've put together. So our communications director has kind of reached out to our island adopters and asked them for stories about why they volunteer, and same thing with our island owners. So some of that gets posted there. And then sometimes we'll have members who have done a trip post something. I think a few years ago, I might have done one about my favorite places to get ice cream while I'm traveling the coast. So there's a range of what goes up there. We do try to do a lot of education type stuff as well. So leave no trace topics will go there too.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun and a good place to learn more too.
Yeah, it's kind of things where we post longer stories than can fit in other platforms.
Yep.
Oh gosh, 3 days to explore in a small powerboat. I mean, the Deer Isle Archipelago is, not that I'm biased or anything, but it's just an amazing area with endless islands to be able to visit. So I'd say that's, hands down, one of my favorite places.
Where would you start to begin that section, the trail?
Yeah, and I would say because access is actually kind of such a challenge on the Deer Isle Peninsula itself, I often try to launch not from Stonington, especially if I'm in a power boat and I have, you know, the horsepower to be able to get around a little faster compared to paddlers. And so there's several good launch points in Brooklyn and the Sedgwick area that I'll use, both from Naskeag Point, and Sedgwick has a little just small town ramp. So it kind of depends on what size boat you have, but for our 18-foot Luns, those work fine for launching. And there's just, yeah, you can go, Blue Hill has some good launch ramps as well. So. The question of favorite region and favorite islands is always a hard one, because it's pretty amazing. But I'm not just saying this because this is kind of geared for organizations in the Deer Isle Blue Hill area, but it is part of my favorite on the coast. As we've expanded our stewardship staff, I felt lucky to be able to keep that part of the coast.
There was a question about like an elaboration on member benefits. Is there anything that maybe common misconceptions or things that people overlook that we might want to highlight on to share some knowledge?
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, as far as for MITA members, that our member benefits is something that often gets kind of forgotten, or people don't realize how many businesses offer discounts to MITA members. And so we have on our website, there's a list of what those are. And it's not always a huge discount, maybe, you know, 10 to 20%, depending on what the service is or where it is. But there's, you know, retail stores, there's kayak tours and rentals, there's charter trips, and others just like food services. And also for sailors and power boaters, there's a lot of mooring and docking discounts as well in there. And that's another area where we're adding a lot more information to the app and the guidebook this year. So the 2021 book hasn't come out yet, but we're adding a lot more resources for bigger boaters as far as, you know, transient moorings and where there's fuel facilities and that sort of thing along the coast. So we're trying to add more of that content. New member in December. So yeah, MITA's, I can talk a little bit about membership. It's not the side that I work in, but from tell you what I can. Our membership is on a calendar year, basically because of the guidebook production. But if you join in the winter, you're good through the following. So if you join in December, your membership doesn't expire in a month. You're good through the following calendar year. And so if you've signed up as a member, you should have received an email with a code to download the app or access the app. If you haven't, reach out to me or info@MITA, and then the guidebook will come out in late April, early May. And we'll usually launch the new version of the app with all the new content a little bit earlier than that, in mid to late April. But yes, once the weather starts getting nicer, we always start getting calls of, where's the guidebook? And it's off at the printer now.
So you do a new guidebook every single year. Is that because you have additions each coming season?
Yeah, there's always, you know, little changes that we'll make, but mostly there'll be new trail sites every year. This year, there's a few trail sites that came off, which is not that common, but because it's kind of a fluid thing, even if trail sites don't change, sometimes the guidelines might change. So trying to make sure that we're getting the most current information out there.
Yeah.
That must be a lot of work on an annual basis, just keeping that current, doing all that contact and outreach. It's got to give it to you. That's it's no small undertaking, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, but it's you know, great to have it all kind of in one place. So
in the documentation in the blog, do a lot of people do the whole stretch of the coast, and like, is there destination trips that people make for long stretches of time? I don't mean to like hyper focus on that one thing. It just...
Yeah, no, we do. And what's interesting is, you know, we hear from a couple people a year, but kind of unlike, so MITA was recognized as the first recreational water trail in the country. As I said, it was a new concept of a recreational water trail, but now there's over 500. And so there are a lot more water trails that exist. Many of them are river based. And so the one I'm thinking of, the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, kind of goes through Maine and Vermont, upstate New York, and they keep a list of people who have through paddled the whole thing. But it's a little easier because there is, very definite terminus on either end. Whereas with the Maine Island Trail, there's no exact, this is the end or this is the start. But, so we do, people kind of volunteer or tell us that they've done the whole trip. A handful, maybe a half dozen a year that we hear from. So we don't have we don't maintain a running list as the Northern Forest Canoe Trail does. They have a list of people who have through paddled. But, we also know people who have section paddled. So they'll go out for a week every year or 2 weeks every year and do it in that way.
I guess I would probably brag about that too if I did that.
Yep.
Do you have any idea how long it might? I mean, obviously it varies from party to party and group to group, but do you have any idea roughly how long that might take if, say, you're doing it kayak and you're camping in between?
I would say maybe an average would be around a month, month to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks if you're doing the whole coast at a, more leisurely pace. For a while, a week was the fastest that I'd heard of someone doing it. And then Joe, who's a sea kayak guy, did it last summer in 4 days, 7 hours and something like that, where he just had the right conditions and trained for quite some time before he did it. That is not your typical undertaking, but
yeah, that sounds athletic.
Exactly. It was an athletic, that's kind of the nice thing is you can, if you want to go make it an athletic endurance event, you can, weather and tide, all those considerations, and safety are, of course, something that we're always at the forefront of our minds. But it also kind of depends on how some people try to make it more straight shot and kind of stick to the outside route. Other people go up more into the bays and into the tidal rivers and explore. So there's lots of different ways you can do it.
And I also love the idea of folks, picking a certain piece of it each year and making it an annual or seasonal thing. That's also really wonderful too.
Yeah, we had a great story that came in from, we were kind of asking of stories in one of our recent emails, people to share, kind of love on the trail. It was a Valentine's Day type thing. And a dad shared some stories of, he's like, well, this isn't romantic love, but going out with his son and doing a 1 week trip ever since his son was little. And now he's in college. They do a father-son trip every year on the trail. So there's, yeah. Really sweet.
That's so great.
I see another question about the skipper program. And yes, so we have 6 boats that cover the entire coast. So it is, a little bit of a trick to try to place them. There's still a lot of driving and towing that is involved, but going kind of from west to east along the coast, we have one in the kind of Portland area in Falmouth. We have a boat in the Brunswick area. One in Edgecombe, one in Rockland, Camden, Rockland area, and then Prospect, Ellsworth area. Yes, I think I got them all. So they get towed quite a distance. And early on in our monitor program, we just had 2 boats that covered the entire trail. And then for a long time, it was 4 boats. So we're up to 6 now. But they get used pretty regularly throughout the season between the monitor runs and then all the cleanups and work days.
Maria, do you ever hear of people needing rescuing on their boat trips or while they're camping, or do you guys have anything to do with that if that ever happens?
We don't have that much to do with that. Kind of thankfully that should go directly to the Coast Guard. A few years ago, there was an effort there's a group called the Maine Association of Sea Kayak Guides and Instructors. And so they were working with the Coast Guard to try to kind of have a list of local resources. And so we were involved with that. If the Coast Guard needed some local knowledge or help, we could be in communication, but thankfully, generally, there's not. And I see another question about the skipper program here. As far as training the skippers. So as I mentioned, skippers will go through an apprentice kind of period and then they're signed off and they'll, be part of the program as long as it works for them. So that they kind of have the initial training. And as far as recruiting new apprentices, we'll do targeted, we always have people kind of reaching out who are interested in the program. So it's kind of happens naturally that people will come into it. There have been occasions where we've kind of been lacking for skippers in a region. So we'll do some targeted outreach looking for new folks for a region.
Well, if anyone has any last questions, we're getting close to wrap up time. This has been really, really wonderful, Maria. I haven't kayaked any of the islands or done any of this trail, but I really want to now. Very excited to do that.
Yeah, starts getting excited for that. It's getting to be that time of year almost.
Yeah.
Almost.
Maria, do you often sail or any of the stretches, or mostly kayaking and motorboating?
Yeah, mostly. So I grew up power boating with my family and then got into paddling and sea kayak guiding before I was with MITA. So kind of for my personal experience on the trail, it's mostly either paddle or power boat when I'm out there. And it's funny now when I go back to kayaking after being in the, having a 30 horsepower engine, my just sense of how long it takes to get from place to place shifts a little bit.
Big difference.
And I see a question here. Yeah, so our boats are 18 feet and they have 30 horsepower engines. So we do certainly have to pay attention to weather and, all those considerations, fog especially. They really are pretty seaworthy boats. I've been out in, pretty rough water with them. So we have to be pretty, very aware of the conditions, but they're really quite remarkable what those boats can do. We've been really pleased with them. And our boats are all kind of customized the way we've outfitted them. We've put kind of these grab rails on them that are something that one of our skippers designed himself. And we've had, it was actually a shop class at a high school up in Steuben that put those on for us. So we have some things that help make them a little safer in some ways and just customize them for our uses. And I see there's a question here about reservations. So the vast majority of the islands on the trail are just first come, first serve. And some do have multiple campsites where if you show up and there's someone camping, there's another site elsewhere on the island, depending on the size of the island. But I'd say with very few exceptions, they're just first come, first serve. The exceptions being Warren Island State Park is part of the trail. So there are some places you can reserve there, but there are first come, first served spots there as well. And that's, we do kind of in our literature talk a lot about the, leave no trace and just planning ahead. And especially, if it's a prime summer weekend, try to show up early to the place you want to camp. So that way, if someone's there, you can kind of move on to the next island and try to find some place. And that's more, it's, to be respectful of other island visitors and also kind of impact on the place as well, trying to minimize the impact of having too many people in one place.
Do the campsites have fire pits?
Some do. And so with all the kind of guidelines for the islands, it's basically up to the island owner. Do they want to allow camping? Do they want to allow pets? Do they want to allow fires? So all of that depends on the island owner. And so some do have fire rings. Otherwise, if they don't have an established fire pit, and they allow fires, then it's kind of, below the high tide line, build a small fire kind of on the sand or gravel. So it can be low impact. And that's a lot of what our skippers do and adopters when they're out checking on the islands. If someone has built a fire pit, they'll dismantle it and that sort of thing. I think I had one other thought about the fires. I forget what that was. Oh, and then all the islands have capacities as well, which are just kind of how many people, should be camping on the island. And all of these, they're not hard and fast rules as far as capacity and that sort of thing. It's just kind of the best guidelines for the islands.
Do you find that there's a lot of overlap? Like if one person's already camping there, do you find that like other people show up and then have to move on? Or are there enough places generally that doesn't happen?
It depends. There are, some islands, especially some of the state islands, are ones that have been historically very, well-known and well-used that are incredibly popular, and you'll have lots of groups showing up. And there's other islands that are just less known don't see that use. I would say last year with the pandemic, I think land managers all across the board saw huge increases in use, and the islands were no exception to that. There was just a ton of people out, and it was a great, it's a silver lining of everything, is that people are discovering these places and enjoying them. But it did mean that in some of the more kind of popular areas, every weekend, every single island that allowed camping would have campers on it. So it, there was kind of more demand than supply in some cases. So we're kind of looking ahead to that this summer, how we can try to kind of encourage people to go on off-peak times, or get there early, or what we can do to mitigate that. But, but I'd say kind of seeking out the lesser known places is a good bet.
Cool. Good to know.
There's a lot of coast that's covered, but is there a favorite spot that you've come across? I know that you're a little partial to the Deer Isle / Blue Hill area, but are you not allowed to answer that question? I guess that's fair too.
Yeah, I know one of my coworkers says his favorite island is the one he's on at the time, and maybe I shouldn't say my favorite, because then everyone will be there when I go camp this summer. But Potato Island is a little state-owned island at the mouth of Eggemoggin Reach, and that is one of my favorites. When I tell the story, when I first started with MITA, one of our longtime skippers and kind of founding members took me out to train me, and we launched out of Naskeag Point. And I felt like every island we landed on, I was like, oh, this is my favorite island. And then the next island, it was, oh, this is my favorite island, all day long. So they're all just incredible. But Potato Island's one of those. It's actually the photo that I shared when I was talking about Getch's survey of the islands. It's just kind of a quintessential, small, spruce-covered, rocky island. And it had eagles nesting on it for quite a few years. It was actually off the trail because eagles were nesting. And then 2 years ago, we found eagles nesting on another nearby island and thought there wouldn't normally be eagles nesting so close together. And so we visited Potato to check on it, and the tree that had the nest had blown down over the course of the winter. So we checked in with the state, and it's state owned. And so we were able to reopen it for camping since the eagles had relocated. So
cool.
It's a sweet little spot.
Maybe we'll take one more question from Randy. Looks like that's in the chat box. Do you see it, Maria?
I do. So he brings up a good point that, I didn't get into the history of the islands, but a lot of them at one point with the European settlement were cleared for grazing of livestock. And so now there's a lot of spruce that have come up in even age stands. And so they're hitting maturity and they're toppling. So it's, not a immediate thing, but every year with every windstorm, there's more trees that come down. So a lot of those spruce stands are aging out on quite a few of the islands. Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful, Maria. Thank you for your presentation and for answering all of our questions and for spending time with us this evening.
Thank you,
guys. For all your good work. Thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely, folks are welcome to reach out to me directly if they've got questions or want to get involved. I'm happy to keep answering questions after the fact.
Thank you so much. I will send out a follow-up email to everyone who has registered with information that Maria has provided about MITA, as well as a link to the recording if you want to watch it again. And we hope you all have a really great night. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care.